Elena Matthews stood in front of her bathroom mirror, carefully applying a touch of mascara to her lashes. She rarely wore makeup these days, preferring the simplicity of her natural face. Tonight was different. Tonight she had to look the part. "Are you almost ready?" James called from the bedroom. "The driver will be here in 15 minutes. Elena sighed, capping her mascara. "Just finishing up," she replied, her voice betraying a hint of reluctance. The reflection staring back at her showed a woman in her early 30s with kind eyes and an understated elegance. Despite having access to the most expensive clothing brands in the world, Elena had chosen a simple black dress she'd owned for years. It was classic, tasteful, and, most importantly, it made her feel like herself. As the wife of tech billionaire James Matthews, Elena lived in a world of extreme privilege. Their home, a sprawling mansion overlooking the Pacific Ocean, had been featured in architectural magazines. The garage housed cars worth more than most people's lifetime earnings. Yet amid all this luxury, Elena maintained a quiet, almost separate existence. She stepped out of the bathroom to find James adjusting his bow tie. At 40, he was still strikingly handsome, with salt and pepper hair that only enhanced his authoritative presence. His custom tuxedo probably cost more than what the average person made in a month. "You look beautiful," he said, though his eyes barely skimmed over her as he checked his watch. "Though you could have worn the Valentino I bought you last month." Elena smiled softly. "This one's more comfortable, and no one will be looking at me anyway." James frowned slightly. "You're my wife. People always look." This was the fundamental difference between them. James believed in displaying wealth in making an impression. Elena believed in substance over show. It wasn't that she didn't appreciate their fortunate circumstances. She simply didn't feel the need to broadcast it. 3 years into their marriage, they had settled into a pattern. James built his empire, attending meetings, making deals, increasing their already substantial fortune. Elena volunteered at the local community center, teaching art to children and helping elderly residents with computer skills. The irony wasn't lost on her, the wife of a tech genius helping senior citizens navigate email. "Tell me again what this event is for," Elena said, slipping on simple pearl earrings, a gift from her grandmother, worth little in money but everything in sentiment. James tapped something on his phone before answering. "It's the Illuminate Foundation's annual gala. They fund music programs in underprivileged schools." "That sounds worthwhile," Elena remarked, a flicker of genuine interest crossing her face. Music had once been her world, though that was a lifetime ago now. "It's the social event of the season," James continued, missing the brief light in her eyes. "The Richardsons, the Wongs, the Patels, everyone who matters will be there. And the foundation does good work, of course," he added as an afterthought. Elena nodded, used to this perspective. To James, charity events were networking opportunities first, actual charity second. It wasn't that he didn't care. He donated generously. But the social capital these events generated was always foremost in his mind. The doorbell chimed, announcing their driver's arrival. "Ready?" James offered his arm with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Always the gentleman in gestures, if not always in attention. Elena took his arm. "As I'll ever be." The drive to the Ritz-Carlton was mostly silent. James spent it reviewing emails on his phone, while Elena watched the city lights blur past the window. She thought about the first time she'd attended one of these galas as James's date, before they were married. How overwhelmed she'd felt by the opulence, the famous faces, the casual displays of wealth. How James had proudly introduced her, his hand warm at the small of her back. Somewhere along the way, that pride had faded into something more perfunctory. She had become an accessory, expected to be present but not particularly noticed. "Remember, the Hansons are looking to invest in the new medical tech division," James said suddenly, breaking her reverie. "And the foundation chairman's daughter just graduated from Stanford. Mention that if you speak with him." Elena nodded, though she wished just once they could attend an event without an agenda. "I'll remember." The car pulled up to the hotel entrance where a red carpet stretched to the doors. Photographers lined the sides, though they weren't the paparazzi kind. These were hired to document the event for society pages and foundation publicity. As they stepped out, camera flashes illuminated them briefly. James immediately straightened, his public persona taking over. Confident, charming, the visionary tech leader. Elena took her usual half-step behind him, smiling politely but keeping her expression neutral enough not to attract particular attention. They walked through the grand lobby toward the ballroom, James nodding at acquaintances along the way. Elena recognized many faces from previous events, fellow members of the ultra-wealthy club she'd unexpectedly joined when she married James. Most knew little about her beyond her status as James Matthews' wife, and she preferred it that way. James. There you are! A tall woman in a shimmering gold dress approached, air-kissing both his cheeks before turning to Elena. And Elena, darling. So lovely to see you again. Hello, Patricia, Elena replied warmly, though she doubted the woman remembered their last conversation, which had lasted all of 2 minutes before someone more important had drawn her attention away. The foundation has surpassed last year's fundraising goal already, Patricia gushed. Your donation was extremely generous. Happy to help, James replied smoothly. The company believes strongly in investing in future talent. As they continued into the ballroom, Elena took in the elaborate decorations. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over tables adorned with extravagant flower arrangements. A small stage was set up at one end where presumably speeches and entertainment would take place. I'm going to find Richard Chen, James murmured in her ear. He's been avoiding my calls about the merger. Why don't you get us some drinks? Before she could respond, he was gone, weaving through the crowd with purpose. Elena stood alone for a moment before making her way to the bar. This was how these evenings typically unfolded. James would work the room while she drifted at the periphery, making polite conversation when approached but never really connecting. White wine, please, she told the bartender, who returned with a crystal glass of something surely expensive. She took a small sip, feeling the familiar knot of discomfort forming in her stomach. First time at one of these things? A voice asked beside her. Elena turned to find a woman about her age in a vibrant blue dress, her expression sympathetic. No, I've been to quite a few, Elena replied with a smile. They just never get easier, the woman laughed. I'm Lisa. My husband dragged me here because his company donated a chunk of money. Elena. Same situation, different husband. They clinked glasses in solidarity. Which one is yours? Lisa asked, scanning the crowd. Elena nodded toward where James stood in an animated conversation with several men in nearly identical tuxedos. James Matthews. Lisa's eyes widened slightly. The James Matthews? Of Nexus Technologies? Elena nodded, used to this reaction. Wow. I read about your house in Architectural Digest. 20,000 square feet? 22, Elena corrected with a small smile. Though most of it just echoes. We really only use a few rooms. Lisa seemed ready to ask more questions when the lights dimmed slightly, indicating the program was about to begin. Elena excused herself to find James, who had saved her a seat at a front table. There you are, he said, barely glancing up. Did you get a chance to speak with anyone useful? The question stung, though Elena kept her expression neutral. Just making friends. James looked at her then, a brief flash of something, regret perhaps, crossing his face before he squeezed her hand. I'm glad you came tonight. I know these events aren't your favorite. For a moment, Elena glimpsed the man she'd fallen in love with, the one who noticed her, who valued her presence for more than social convenience. Then his phone buzzed and the moment passed as his attention diverted once again. The foundation director took the stage, welcoming everyone and thanking major donors. James's name received special mention, prompting polite applause. Elena clapped along, watching her husband acknowledge the recognition with a practiced wave. As the speeches continued, detailing the foundation's work bringing music education to schools that had lost funding for arts programs, Elena found herself genuinely moved. She thought of her own childhood, how music had been her refuge during difficult times, how she'd once dreamed of sharing that gift with others before life had taken her in a different direction. We have a special treat tonight, the director was saying. A renowned soprano will be performing after dinner to showcase exactly why music education matters so much. Elena felt a twinge of anticipation. It had been ages since she'd heard live classical music. Before marrying James, she'd regularly attended community concerts. Now, despite having access to the best performances money could buy, she rarely went. Somehow, the exclusive box seats and VIP treatment had stripped away the simple joy she once found in music. As dinner was served an elaborate multi-course affair, Elena found herself wondering how she had arrived at this life so far, removed from her original path. She'd met James when catering an event at his company. He'd been captivated by her, pursuing her with the same determination that had built his business empire. She'd been charmed by his intensity, his brilliance, the way he seemed to see something special in her when she felt invisible to the world. Somewhere between then and now, the roles had reversed. Now she often felt invisible to him, while the world saw only her husband. The foundation director returned to the stage as dessert was being cleared. "Ladies and gentlemen, I've just received unfortunate news. Our scheduled performer has taken ill and won't be able to join us tonight." A murmur of disappointment swept through the room. "However," he continued, "the show must go on. The children's choir that benefits from our program will still perform, but we're looking for a volunteer to open the musical portion of our evening. Anyone with musical training who might be willing to help us out?" The room fell silent, guests suddenly fascinated by their water glasses or centerpieces. Beside Elena, James's assistant Zoe leaned forward, whispering something to the event coordinator, who had approached their table in desperation. Elena was only half listening, still thinking about the canceled performance when she heard her name. "Mrs. Matthews has an incredible voice. I heard her once at the office holiday party." Elena froze as heads turned in her direction. James looked at her with surprise. "Would you consider performing, Mrs. Matthews?" the coordinator asked hopefully. "Just one song to open for the children's choir?" 100 refusals rose to her lips. She hadn't performed publicly in years. She wasn't prepared. But as she opened her mouth to decline, she caught sight of a group of children peeking out from behind the stage curtain, the students from the Foundation's program, watching with nervous excitement for their own upcoming performance. Elena remembered being that young, that hopeful, that in love with music. Before adult concerns and compromises had taken over, before she'd become simply James Matthews's wife. She began, surprising herself with her next words. "Yes, I can sing one song." James stared at her as if seeing her for the first time in years. The words had left Elena's mouth before she could stop them. "Yes, I can sing one song." The event coordinator's face lit up with relief. "Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mrs. Matthews. We'll have you on in 15 minutes, right before the children's choir." As the coordinator hurried away, Elena felt the weight of James's stare. She turned to find him looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Confusion, certainly, but something else too. "Curiosity, concern? You can sing?" he asked quietly, leaning closer so the other guests at their table couldn't hear. Elena nodded, her heart hammering in her chest. "I used to. A long time ago. How did I not know this?" His tone wasn't accusatory, just genuinely bewildered, as if discovering his wife of 3 years suddenly spoke a language he'd never heard her use. Before she could respond, Zoe, James's assistant, appeared at her side. "Mrs. Matthews, if you'll follow me. They need you backstage to go over the technical details." Elena stood on shaky legs, smoothing her simple black dress. "I'll be back," she told James, who was still staring at her with that puzzled expression. Following Zoe through the crowded ballroom, Elena felt a wave of panic rising. What had she just agreed to? She hadn't performed in public for over a decade, and now her first time back would be in front of hundreds of wealthy, judgmental people who knew her only as James Matthews' quiet wife. Backstage was a flurry of activity. Staff members adjusted lighting. Sound technicians checked microphones, and in one corner, about 20 children in matching outfits practiced their harmonies under the watchful eye of their music teacher. Mrs. Matthews, the event coordinator, whose name badge read Diane, rushed over. "Thank you again for stepping in. What song will you be performing?" "Do you need sheet music for our pianist?" Reality crashed down on Elena. She hadn't even thought about what to sing. She began, her mind racing through possibilities. Something simple. Something she knew by heart. Something that wouldn't strain her unpracticed voice. Her gaze drifted to the children's choir. They had paused their rehearsal and were watching her with undisguised curiosity. One small girl with braided hair gave her a shy wave. Elena waved back, feeling a sudden calm settle over her. Amazing grace, when she decided. "I don't need sheet music. Any decent pianist will know it." Diane nodded, scribbling on her clipboard. Perfect. Something classic. Our pianist is Thomas over there by the grand piano. Why don't you touch base with him while I check on the sound levels? Elena made her way to the piano, where a middle-aged man with kind eyes was arranging sheet music. Hello, she said softly. I'm Elena Matthews. I'll be singing Amazing Grace. I understand you'll be accompanying me? Thomas looked up with a warm smile. Pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Matthews. Amazing Grace is lovely. Any particular key you prefer? It had been so long since anyone had asked her such a question. In her previous life, before James, before becoming a billionaire's wife, these conversations had been daily occurrences. A flat, if that works for you, she said, surprised at how easily the musical terminology returned to her. And a simple accompaniment, please. Nothing flashy. Thomas nodded approvingly. Of course. Would you like to run through it once? Elena glanced at the stage where staff were still adjusting lighting. Yes, but maybe somewhere more private? He gestured to a small preparation room off to the side. After you. The room was little more than a glorified closet with an upright piano wedged into one corner. Thomas sat down and played a gentle introduction, nodding to signal her entrance. Elena closed her eyes and began to sing, softly at first. The initial notes were tentative, her voice finding its way after years of disuse. But by the second line, muscle memory took over. Her diaphragm engaged properly, her breath control returned, and the sound opened up, pure, clear, and touched with an emotional depth that made Thomas's fingers momentarily stumble on the keys. When she finished the first verse, she opened her eyes to find the pianist staring at her. Mrs. Matthews, he said slowly, if you don't mind my asking, have you had professional training? Elena felt her cheeks warm. A lifetime ago. It doesn't matter now. Thomas looked like he wanted to press further, but instead simply said, well, you'll have no trouble out there. Shall we try once more, full voice this time? They ran through the song again, Elena allowing her voice to reach its full capacity. It felt like reuniting with an old friend, one she hadn't realized how desperately she'd missed. A knock at the door interrupted them. Diane poked her head in. 5 minutes, Mrs. Matthews. Reality came rushing back. In 5 minutes, she would be standing in front of hundreds of people, including her husband, doing something she'd locked away for years. Her hands began to tremble, Thomas noticed. Stage fright? Something like that, Elena admitted. He closed the piano lid gently. My mother was a singer. She always said that nerves just mean you care about getting it right. Channel it into your performance. Elena nodded gratefully as they made their way back to the stage area. The children's choir had lined up in the wings, watching her with wide, excited eyes. Their teacher, a woman with a practical bun and comfortable shoes, approached Elena. The kids are thrilled to have a real singer open for them, she said. They're nervous about performing for all these rich folks. Seeing you up there first will help them. Elena hadn't considered this angle. I'm nervous too, she confessed. The teacher smiled. Well, don't tell them that. They think you're some kind of professional. Mrs. Matthews? Diane appeared again. We're ready for you now. Elena smoothed her dress, wishing suddenly that she'd worn something more suitable for performing. The children's teacher seemed to read her mind. You look beautiful, she said reassuringly. Just sing from your heart. Heart pounding, Elena stepped toward the stage. As she passed the line of children, the small girl with braids reached out and squeezed her hand. You'll be amazing, the child whispered. Tears pricked at Elena's eyes as she squeezed back. So will you. From the stage entrance, Elena could see the ballroom full of guests. The lights had been dimmed, but she could make out James at their table near the front, his expression still a mixture of confusion and anticipation. Around him, guests chatted idly, paying little attention to the stage. These events were social occasions first, charity functions second. Most wouldn't bother to listen carefully. The foundation director stepped to the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, while we regret the absence of our scheduled performer, we're delighted that Mrs. Elena Matthews has graciously agreed to open our musical program this evening. Please welcome her to the stage. Polite applause followed as Elena walked to the center of the stage. The spotlight felt hot on her skin. Thomas took his place at the piano, giving her an encouraging nod. Elena stepped to the microphone, its unfamiliar presence making her acutely aware of every breath. Good evening, she said softly, her voice amplified throughout the room. I'm honored to support the Illuminate Foundation's important work bringing music to children. She glanced toward the wings where the children's choir waited, their faces eager and supportive. Something shifted inside her. This wasn't about her or James or the wealthy audience. This was about those kids and the power of music to transform lives, something she understood deeply. "I'd like to dedicate this to every child who finds their voice through music," she said, her confidence growing. Elena nodded to Thomas, who began the gentle introduction. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and let the familiar melody carry her. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. Her voice emerged pure and clear, filling the ballroom with unexpected beauty. The casual chatter at the tables quickly died away. Elena kept her eyes closed, focusing only on the music, on the meaning of each word, on the emotion she'd kept bottled up for too long. By the second verse, she dared to open her eyes. The entire room had gone still. Waitstaff had paused in their duties. The event photographer had lowered his camera, simply listening. In the front row, James had leaned forward in his chair. His expression transformed into one of absolute astonishment. "Through many dangers, toils and snares I have already come." The words resonated with Elena's own journey. The dangers of losing herself in James's world. The toil of maintaining a facade. The snare of forgetting her own passions. As she approached the final verse, Elena felt something inside her break free. Her voice soared, reaching notes with a power and clarity that seemed to vibrate through the crystal chandeliers above. The children in the wings were watching with wide eyes and open mouths. One of them whispered loudly enough for Elena to hear, "She sings like an angel." Elena smiled as she sang, feeling truly seen for the first time in years. Not as James Matthews' wife, not as a trophy or an accessory, but as herself, Elena, the woman who had once lived for music. As the final notes faded, there was a moment of complete silence. Elena stood in the spotlight, suddenly uncertain. Had she embarrassed herself? Overestimated her abilities? Then the applause began, hesitant at first, then building to a roaring standing ovation. People were on their feet, expressions of genuine amazement on their faces. At the center table, James remained seated, staring at her as if seeing her for the first time. In that moment, as the applause washed over her, Elena realized she'd done more than just sing a song. She'd reclaimed a piece of herself long thought lost. And judging by her husband's stunned expression, she'd also just changed something fundamental in their relationship. What exactly that meant, she wasn't yet sure. The applause continued as Elena stood frozen in the spotlight. She had forgotten this feeling, the rush that came after a performance, the warmth of an audience's appreciation. For years, she'd lived in the shadows of her husband's success, content to be unnoticed. Now hundreds of eyes were fixed on her, seeing her, truly seeing her, perhaps for the first time. "Thank you," she said softly into the microphone, overwhelmed by the response. She gave a small, graceful bow and moved to leave the stage. The foundation director rushed forward, stopping her retreat. "Mrs. Matthews, that was extraordinary." He took the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, wasn't that remarkable? Let's give Mrs. Matthews another round of applause." The crowd obliged enthusiastically. Elena nodded in acknowledgement, desperate now to exit the stage. As she made her way to the steps, she finally allowed herself to look directly at James. He remained seated while everyone around him stood applauding. His expression was unreadable, not angry, not proud, just stunned. Backstage, the children's choir surrounded her, their excitement palpable. "That was amazing. How did you learn to sing like that? Can you teach me?" The choir director gently shooed them away. "All right, children, it's your turn now. Focus." She turned to Elena with undisguised admiration. "Mrs. Matthews, that was breathtaking. Are you professionally trained?" Elena managed a small smile. "I was once. A long time ago." "Well, you certainly haven't lost your touch," the director said, squeezing her arm before hurrying after her students. Elena found a quiet corner backstage, leaning against the wall as her legs suddenly felt weak. The adrenaline that had carried her through the performance was fading, leaving her shaky and vulnerable. She hadn't sung like that in public since Mrs. Matthews. Zoe appeared beside her, wide-eyed. "That was incredible. Mr. Matthews would like you to join him at the table when you're ready." Elena nodded, taking a deep breath. "Tell him I'll be there in a minute." Alone again, she closed her eyes. One song. One simple song, and she'd cracked open the carefully sealed vault of her past. What would James think? What would he ask? How much would she have to explain? From the stage, she could hear the children's choir beginning their performance. Young, untrained voices singing with heartfelt enthusiasm. She smiled, remembering when she'd been that young, that passionate about music, before reality had intervened. Taking one last steadying breath, Elena made her way back to the ballroom. As she wove through the tables, strangers stopped her, offering compliments and curious questions. She thanked them politely but kept moving, her eyes fixed on James, who was watching her approach with that same bewildered expression. When she finally reached their table, James stood, pulling out her chair. "That was unexpected," he said quietly as she sat down. Before she could respond, Patricia from earlier rushed over, her face flushed with excitement. "Elena, my goodness, what a hidden talent. You've been holding out on us all this time." More guests crowded around their table, all eager to express their amazement and ask questions Elena wasn't ready to answer. James, sensing her discomfort, placed a hand on her shoulder. "If you'll excuse us," he said to the gathering crowd, his voice carrying the authority that came naturally to him. "My wife and I would like to enjoy the children's performance." The guests reluctantly dispersed, though Elena could feel their eyes still on her, could hear them whispering. James leaned close, his lips near her ear. "We'll talk about this later," he said, not unkindly, but with a firmness that made it clear he expected answers. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. The children's choir finished to enthusiastic applause, though Elena noticed several guests checking their phones during the performance. The same guests who had given her their rapt attention. The foundation director announced that donations had surpassed their goal, with several major donors increasing their pledges after the musical performances. One donor was so moved by Mrs. Matthews's performance that they doubled their contribution on the spot. The director announced, beaming in Elena's direction. James raised an eyebrow at this but said nothing. When the formal program ended, the evening shifted to mingling and networking. Typically, this was when James would work the room while Elena found a quiet corner or made polite small talk with the spouses of his business associates. Tonight, however, James stayed by her side as guest after guest approached to compliment her performance. "I had no idea your wife was so talented," said a silver-haired man Elena recognized as the CEO of a major tech company. "You've been keeping her all to yourself, Matthews." James smiled tightly. "Apparently, I didn't know either." There was an awkward pause before the man chuckled, assuming it was a joke, and moved on to discuss business matters. Throughout these interactions, Elena could feel James watching her, studying her as if trying to reconcile this new version of his wife with the quiet woman he thought he knew. Finally, as the crowd began to thin, James touched her elbow. "Ready to go home?" Elena nodded, exhausted from the emotional roller coaster of the evening. They said their goodbyes, James making his usual promises to follow up on business discussions, Elena receiving unusual invitations to coffee and lunch from women who had barely acknowledged her existence at previous events. The car ride home was silent. Elena stared out the window, watching the city lights, feeling James's unasked questions filling the space between them. Their driver, sensing the tension, kept his eyes firmly on the road. When they arrived home, James loosened his bow tie as they walked through the grand foyer. Elena kicked off her heels, feeling the cool marble against her bare feet. "Would you like a drink?" James asked, heading toward the bar in their living room. "Water, please," Elena replied, sinking onto the sofa. The house felt especially vast and empty tonight. James returned with a glass of water for her and a scotch for himself. He sat across from her, loosening his cufflinks. "So," he said finally, breaking the silence, "you can sing." Elena nodded, taking a sip of water. "Yeah, huh? Not just sing, you can really sing." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Elena, you sounded like a professional up there." She looked down at her glass, watching the water ripple as her hand trembled slightly. "I was, almost." James's eyebrows shot up. "What do you mean, almost?" Elena took a deep breath. The moment she'd been avoiding for years had arrived. "I studied at Juilliard, voice performance with a focus on classical and opera." James stared at her, his drink forgotten in his hand. "Juilliard? As in one of the most prestigious music schools in the world?" Elena nodded. "How long?" 3 years. I left before graduating." James set his glass down with a sharp clink. 3 years at Juilliard and you never thought to mention it? We've been married for 3 years, Elena. Together for 5. How does this never come up? The hurt in his voice was evident, and Elena felt a flash of guilt, quickly replaced by a surge of defensive anger. When exactly should I have mentioned it, James? During which business dinner or charity gala or tech conference? In between you checking your emails and taking phone calls? James recoiled slightly at her tone. In their years together, Elena had rarely raised her voice. That's not fair, he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? Elena stood, suddenly unable to sit still. When was the last time you asked me about my past? About my dreams or what I gave up before I met you? When was the last time we had a conversation that wasn't about your company or your social obligations? James opened his mouth to argue, then closed it, a flicker of recognition crossing his face. Elena continued, the words pouring out after being dammed up for so long. Do you know why I left Juilliard? My mother got sick, cancer. I was her only family. I gave up my scholarship, moved home to take care of her. James's expression softened. I didn't know that. No, you didn't, Elena said quietly. Because you never asked. You saw what you wanted to see. A simple woman who fit neatly into your world without complications. She walked to the window, looking out at the moonlight reflecting off the pool. After Mom died, I couldn't go back. The scholarship was gone and I couldn't afford the tuition. So I got a job at a catering company and that's where I met you. James stood, moving to stand behind her, though he didn't touch her. Why didn't you tell me any of this when we met? When we got married? Elena turned to face him, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. At first it hurt too much to talk about. Then as I got to know your world, the wealth, the constant achievement, the success at all costs, I worried you wouldn't understand giving up a career for family. James flinched at this assessment of his values. That's what you think of me? That I wouldn't understand sacrifice? Would you have? Elena asked softly. The James Matthews who built a tech empire from nothing? Who prides himself on never backing down from a challenge? Would you have understood walking away from a dream? The question hung in the air between them. James ran a hand through his hair, his confident facade crumbling. I don't know, he admitted finally. Maybe not then. But that doesn't explain why you kept singing a secret all these years. You could have joined a choir, taken private lessons. Something. Elena's shoulders sagged. After Mom died, singing reminded me of everything I'd lost. By the time the pain faded, I'd met you, and your life was so different from anything I'd known. I didn't think there was room for that part of me anymore. So you just gave it up, buried your talent? James's voice was incredulous. People give up parts of themselves for relationships all the time, James, Elena said, exhaustion creeping into her voice. Sometimes they don't even realize they're doing it until it's too late. A heavy silence fell between them. James picked up his scotch and drained it, the ice cubes clinking. I never asked you to give up anything, he said finally. You never had to, Elena replied. I did it willingly. That's what scared me tonight, how easily it all came back. How much I've missed it without even admitting it to myself. James studied her face, seeing his wife, truly seeing her, perhaps for the first time in years. You were incredible tonight, he said softly. I've never heard anything like it. A tear escaped down Elena's cheek. Thank you. So what happens now? James asked, and there was uncertainty in his voice. A rarity for a man who always knew his next move. Elena wiped away the tear. I don't know. But I can't go back to pretending that part of me doesn't exist. Not anymore. The truth hung between them like a living thing, changing the air in their too large house, altering the familiar contours of their marriage. Neither knew what would come next, but both understood that something fundamental had shifted, all because of one simple song. Morning light filtered through the curtains as Elena opened her eyes. For a moment she forgot about the previous night, but then the memories flooded back. The stage, the song, the confession. She turned to find James's side of the bed empty. After their conversation, they had gone to sleep in silence, the space between them filled with unspoken thoughts. Elena slipped on her robe and padded downstairs, following the scent of coffee. She found James in the kitchen, still in his pajamas, staring at his laptop screen with an unusual intensity. Good morning, she said softly. James looked up, his expression hard to read. Morning, he gestured to the coffee maker. I made enough for both of us. Elena poured herself a cup, noticing how different this morning felt from their usual routine. Typically, James would be dressed in a suit by now, checking emails on his phone while simultaneously making business calls. Today, he seemed distracted, almost hesitant. What are you looking at? She asked, glancing at his laptop. James turned the screen toward her. On it was a video, shaky footage of her performance from the previous night, clearly recorded on someone's phone. The video title read, "Billionaire's wife stuns crowd with amazing voice." Elena nearly spilled her coffee. Where did you find this? It's everywhere, James said, his voice neutral. Someone posted it last night. It's gone viral. Over 100,000 views already. Elena sank into the chair opposite him, stunned. But how? Welcome to the digital age, James said with a wry smile. Nothing stays private anymore, especially not when it happens at an event full of influential people with social media accounts. He clicked on another tab, showing her a local news website. There was her face captured mid-song under the headline, "Tech Mogul's Secret Weapon Wife Surprises Elite Crowd with Hidden Talent." Oh my God, Elena whispered, scrolling through the article. It was full of quotes from attendees praising her world-class voice and speculating about her background. Someone had even dug up the information that she had attended Juilliard, though the details were incorrect. Your phone's been ringing all morning, James said, nodding toward her cell phone on the counter. I silenced it after the 5th call. Mostly reporters, a few old acquaintances suddenly remembering your existence. Elena felt a wave of anxiety. She valued her privacy, had cultivated it carefully even while married to a public figure. Now overnight she had become a subject of interest herself. I'm sorry, she said, not entirely sure what she was apologizing for. James closed his laptop. Don't be. You didn't do anything wrong. He hesitated, then added, Actually, I'm the one who should be sorry. Elena looked up in surprise. For what? For not knowing who you really are. For not asking. He ran a hand through his uncombed hair, looking surprisingly vulnerable without his usual polished appearance. I've been thinking about what you said last night. About giving up parts of yourself for our relationship. He reached across the table, taking her hand. I never wanted that, Elena. I fell in love with you, the whole you. Not just the parts that fit neatly into my life. Elena felt tears welling up. I know. I don't think either of us realized what was happening. It was so gradual. But it happened, James said firmly. And I let it happen. I got so caught up in my world and business and success and status that I stopped seeing you clearly. He squeezed her hand. Until last night when you opened your mouth to sing and suddenly I couldn't see anything else. Before Elena could respond, James's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and sighed. That's my PR team. They want to know how we should respond to all this media attention. Reality intruded, breaking the moment of connection. Elena withdrew her hand. What do they suggest? The usual playbook. Controlled interview, professional photos, spin it as a charming story about my talented wife. James watched her face carefully. But I told them I wouldn't make any decisions without talking to you first. Elena felt a rush of gratitude for this small but significant change. I don't know if I want to do interviews or be in the spotlight. James nodded. I understand. But, he hesitated. Would you consider singing again? Not for publicity or because of this viral moment, but because it clearly brings you joy. The question hung in the air between them, weighty with possibility. Before Elena could answer, the doorbell rang. James frowned. That's odd. Security didn't call up. He went to check the intercom system while Elena remained at the table, thoughts swirling. Would she consider singing again? The question had been lurking in the back of her mind since the moment she'd stepped off the stage last night. James returned, his expression a mix of amusement and disbelief. It's Thomas, the pianist from last night. Apparently, he talked his way past security. Thomas? What does he want? He says he needs to speak with you. Something about an opportunity. Elena hesitated. I should at least hear what he has to say. James studied her face. I'll have him shown to the living room. Take your time. 20 minutes later, showered and dressed in simple jeans and a sweater, Elena entered the living room to find Thomas perched awkwardly on the edge of their expensive sofa. James sat across from him. The two men engaged in stilted small talk. "Mrs. Matthews," Thomas said, standing as she entered. "Thank you for seeing me. I apologize for showing up unannounced." "It's Elena, please," she said, taking a seat beside James. "What brings you here, Thomas?" The pianist clasped his hands together. "I'll get straight to the point. I'm not just a pianist for hire. I'm also the music director at St. Mary's Church downtown, and we have a community choir that performs concerts to raise money for local shelters and food banks." Elena nodded, beginning to see where this was heading. "We've been looking for a vocal coach, someone who could help our members improve their technique." After hearing you last night, Thomas's eyes lit up with genuine enthusiasm. "You have a rare gift, not just your voice, but how you connect with the music, with the audience. Our choir members could learn so much from you." Elena felt a flutter of excitement, quickly tempered by practicality. "I haven't taught before. I didn't even finish my degree." Thomas waved this away. "Formal credentials don't matter for our program. Your talent and experience do. And," he glanced at James, "it wouldn't be a major time commitment. Just 2 evenings a week plus occasional weekend concerts." James remained silent, but Elena could feel his eyes on her, gauging her reaction. "Why me?" Elena asked. "Especially when you could find someone with more experience, with an actual completed degree." Thomas smiled. "Because when you sang last night, every person in that room felt something. That can't be taught. That comes from somewhere deeper." He leaned forward. "Also, I looked you up after the gala. You were Elena Reyes before you married, right? I found an old recording of you performing at a Juilliard recital. You sang Puccini. It was breathtaking," Elena blushed. She had almost forgotten about that recording from her second year at the conservatory. "Consider it, at least," Thomas said, standing to leave. "We're not a professional outfit, just ordinary people who love music and want to use it to help others." He placed a business card on the coffee table. "The pay isn't much, but that's not why you do it, is it?" After Thomas left, Elena and James sat in silence for a long moment. "Are you going to call him?" James finally asked. Elena twisted her wedding ring, thinking. "I don't know. It sounds wonderful, but what? It's been so long. What if I can't do it? What if I disappoint them?" The insecurities that had built up over years of silence came rushing back. James moved closer, taking her hand. "Elena, you couldn't disappoint anyone with your voice. You heard Thomas, he looked you up, found your old recordings. He knows exactly what he's asking for." "It would change things," Elena said quietly. "Our routine, our life." "Maybe our life needs changing," James replied, surprising her. "Maybe we both got too comfortable, too settled in our roles." He looked around their immaculate, expensive living room. "All of this, the house, the cars, the lifestyle, it doesn't mean anything if you're not happy." Elena studied her husband's face, seeing new depths in the man she thought she knew completely. "When did you become so philosophical?" James laughed softly. "Sometime between hearing my wife sing like an angel and realizing I've been married to a stranger for 3 years. His expression grew serious. "I want to know you, Elena, the real you. Not just the woman who stands beside me at galas and makes polite conversation with business associates." Elena felt something shift between them, as if a door long closed was creaking open. "I want that too, but I'm not even sure I know who the real me is anymore." "Then maybe it's time to find out," James said. He gestured to Thomas's card on the table. "Starting with this." Elena picked up the card, running her finger over the embossed letters. 2 evenings a week, singing again, teaching others. A small step back toward the person she had once been. "Okay," she said, her decision crystallizing. "I'll call him." James smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Good. But," Elena added, "I don't want to do any interviews or photo shoots or carefully managed PR stories about this. If I'm going to find myself again, I need to do it privately on my own terms." James nodded slowly. "I understand. No PR campaign." He paused. "Though you should probably know that your viral video now has over 200,000 views. Privacy might be a luxury, even I can't buy you anymore." Elena groaned but found herself smiling despite the anxiety. "One step at a time," she said. "First, I need to see if I can actually teach anyone to sing." As if on cue, both their phones chimed with incoming messages. Elena's was from Lisa, the woman she'd met at the bar last night. "Just saw your video online. You're amazing. Coffee soon?" James's was from his assistant. 6 different magazines requesting interviews with your wife. "How do you want to proceed?" They looked at each other, and for the first time in what felt like ages, broke into genuine laughter, the kind that comes from shared absurdity and unexpected connection. In that moment of laughter, Elena caught a glimpse of a new future unfolding, one where she wasn't just James Matthews's wife, but Elena Matthews, a woman with her own voice, finally ready to be heard. 6 months had passed since the night Elena sang at the charity gala. 6 months of change, adjustment, and rediscovery. The community choir room at St. Mary's Church buzzed with energy as 25 singers arranged themselves on risers. Elena stood before them, hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing jeans and a comfortable blouse, a far cry from the designer clothes that still hung largely unworn in her closet. "Let's try that passage again," she said, her confidence growing with each week of teaching. "Remember to support from your diaphragm, not your throat. Like this." She demonstrated, her pure tone filling the modest space. The choir members, a mix of ages and backgrounds, watched with admiration before attempting to replicate her technique. Some succeeded better than others, but all showed improvement from where they'd started months ago. Thomas, seated at the piano, caught Elena's eye and smiled. They had developed an easy working relationship, his musical knowledge complementing her vocal expertise. "Much better," Elena encouraged as the sopranos hit a particularly challenging note. "Our concert is in 2 weeks and you sound wonderful. Let's take it from the top one more time. Then we'll wrap up for tonight." As the choir began again, Elena noticed a figure slip quietly through the back door of the room. James, dressed casually in slacks and a sweater instead of his usual tailored suit, leaned against the wall watching. He'd been making an effort to attend her rehearsals when his schedule allowed, something that would have seemed impossible in their previous life. The choir finished the piece with growing confidence. Elena beamed with pride. "That's it for tonight. Remember to practice those breathing exercises I showed you. They make all the difference." As the members gathered their things, many stopped to chat with Elena, sharing small personal victories or asking questions. She gave each one her full attention, something she had learned from her mother's illness. The importance of truly seeing people. When the room had emptied except for Thomas organizing sheet music, James approached. "They sound better every time I hear them," he said, kissing Elena's cheek. Thomas looked up. "It's all thanks to your wife. She's a miracle worker," Elena blushed. "Hardly. They're dedicated and passionate. I just give them tools." "And inspiration," Thomas added, gathering his belongings. "Don't forget we have that meeting tomorrow with the shelter coordinator about the benefit concert." Elena nodded. "I'll be there." After Thomas left, James helped Elena collect her scattered notes and water bottle. "Ready for dinner? I made reservations at that little Italian place you like." Elena smiled, touched by this small but significant gesture. The old James would have chosen the trendiest, most expensive restaurant, concerned with being seen at the right places. This James had learned her actual preferences. "Sounds perfect," she said, taking his hand as they walked to the car, his modest electric sedan rather than the flashy sports car that used to be his preferred transportation. At the restaurant, they settled into a corner booth. No heads turned, no whispers followed them. Here, away from the spotlight of James's business world, they were just another couple enjoying dinner. "How was your day?" Elena asked, genuinely interested. This too was a change. In their former life, James's work had dominated their conversations when they had them at all. Now they made an effort to truly talk to each other. "Productive," he said. "We finalized the grant program for music education in public schools. $10 million over 5 years with priority for schools that have cut arts funding." Elena reached across the table, squeezing his hand. The James Matthews Foundation for Arts Education had been his idea, born in the weeks after her performance. While he still ran his tech company, he had delegated more responsibility to his executive team, freeing up time for the foundation and for their marriage. "That's wonderful," she said. "Those funds will change so many lives." James smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling. "Speaking of changing lives, I got an interesting call today from Robert Chen at the Symphony Foundation." Elena raised an eyebrow. "Oh? He heard about your work with the community choir. Their outreach program needs a director, someone to coordinate music education efforts across the city." James watched her face carefully. "He asked if you might be interested." Elena took a sip of water, considering. 6 months ago, such an opportunity would have seemed impossible, a dream belonging to a different life. Now? It sounds challenging, she said thoughtfully, in a good way. But I wouldn't want to leave the choir. We've built something special there. He mentioned you could keep your role with them. This would be additional with a proper salary and resources. James hesitated. I told him you'd think about it. No pressure either way. Elena nodded, appreciating his restraint. The old James might have accepted on her behalf, seeing only the prestige of the position. I'll call him tomorrow, she decided. It might be a good next step. Their food arrived, momentarily pausing the conversation. As they ate, Elena reflected on the whirlwind of the past 6 months. After agreeing to coach the choir, she had gradually expanded her musical involvement, organizing small concerts, giving occasional private lessons, even performing herself at community events. The viral video of her gala performance had eventually faded from public interest, though it had led to some unexpected reconnections. Former classmates from Juilliard had reached out, including her old voice teacher who had retired to the same city. Now in her 70s, Dr. Abrams had become a mentor again, helping Elena rebuild her technical skills and confidence. Earth to Elena, James said gently, breaking into her thoughts. Where did you go? She smiled. Just thinking about how much has changed. If someone had told me a year ago that I'd be teaching music and considering a position with the Symphony Foundation, would you have believed them? Not for a second. She twirled pasta on her fork. I was so used to being invisible, to being just an extension of your world. I'm not sure I even remembered who I was anymore. James's expression grew serious. I'm sorry for my part in that. I should have seen you, really seen you. Elena reached for his hand again. We both made choices. The important thing is that we're making different ones now. After dinner, they drove home, not to the sprawling mansion overlooking the ocean, but to the smaller, more comfortable house they had moved into 3 months ago. The decision to downsize had shocked James's business associates, generating gossip about financial troubles despite his company's continued success. The truth was simpler. The mansion had never felt like home to Elena, and James had finally realized it never would. Their new house, while still luxurious by most standards, was designed for living rather than impressing visitors. As they entered, Elena kicked off her shoes and curled up on the sofa while James poured them each a glass of wine. I forgot to tell you, he said, sitting beside her. I had an interesting visitor at the office today. The girl from the children's choir at the gala, the one with braids who squeezed your hand before you went on stage. She's in high school now, applying for college music programs. Elena sat up straighter. Really, how did she find you? Her choir director told her about our foundation's scholarship program. She remembered you and wanted to thank you for inspiring her. James handed Elena an envelope. She wrote you this. Elena opened it with careful fingers, unfolding a handwritten letter. Dear Mrs. Matthews, you probably don't remember me, but I was part of the children's choir the night you sang at the gala. I was so scared to perform until I saw you, someone who wasn't a professional singer anymore, stand up and share your gift with everyone. That night changed my life. I decided to take singing seriously. My parents couldn't afford lessons, but my school music teacher helped me, and now I'm applying to music schools, even Juilliard. I just wanted you to know that sometimes a single moment of courage can change someone else's whole future. Thank you for showing me what's possible. Sincerely, Lily. Elena felt tears well up as she finished reading. She's applying to Juilliard, she whispered. James nodded. I told her about our foundation's scholarship program. If she gets accepted, we'll cover what her financial aid doesn't. Thank you, Elena said, truly moved by his thoughtfulness. There's something else, James added, suddenly looking nervous. I've been thinking. Maybe it's time for you to finish what you started. Elena tilted her head, confused. Your degree, James clarified. Juilliard has a program for former students to complete their education. I looked into it. You could do most of it remotely with just a few weeks on campus each semester. Elena stared at him, speechless. It's just an idea, he added quickly. No pressure. I know you're building something meaningful here with the choir, and potentially with the Symphony Foundation. I just thought, yes, Elena interrupted, surprising herself with the immediacy of her answer. Yes, I want to finish my degree. The certainty in her voice was unmistakable. Not because I need it for what I'm doing now, but because I need to close that chapter properly. For me, James smiled, the genuine smile that had become more frequent these past months. Then we'll make it happen. Later that night, as they got ready for bed, Elena paused at the bathroom mirror, studying her reflection. She looked different now, not just the simpler hairstyle or the more relaxed clothing, but something in her eyes. A confidence, a centeredness that had been missing for years. James appeared behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and meeting her eyes in the mirror. "Happy?" he asked softly. Elena leaned back against him, considering the question. Was she happy? It seemed too simple a word for what she felt. Fulfilled, perhaps, authentic, whole. "I'm me," she answered finally. "For the first time in a very long time, I'm completely me." James kissed her temple. "That's all I want." As they turned off the lights and settled into bed, Elena thought about the journey that had started with one reluctant song at a charity gala. How a single moment of courage, as Lily had written, could change everything. Tomorrow she would call Robert Chen about the Symphony Foundation position. She would begin researching Juilliard's program for returning students. She would continue teaching her choir and preparing for their upcoming concert. But tonight, lying beside the husband who had learned to truly see her, Elena simply closed her eyes and let herself feel the fullness of her reclaimed life. A life where her voice, in every sense of the word, had finally been set free.